So I did it. This is a 1971 Honda CT90, Trail 90. It's in pretty rough shape. Only has about almost 4,000 miles on it, but I think most of those miles were on trails. And it's been dropped a bunch. It's got dirt, it's got rust. It's definitely a fixer-upper, but I'm really excited to work on it. I think it's a super cute bike. So, in this first video, I want to kind of shine it up just a little bit. I want to try to get some of the dirt off, some of the rust out of the tank, that sort of thing. Just make it look a little nicer so it's easier to work on. So, the gas tank is underneath the seat here, and you can see that it's in pretty rough shape. Yeah, just real gross down there. The guy was saying, when I bought it, I asked him to drain the gas because I had to put it into my car. I didn't want it to leak everywhere. And he was like, I tried to drain the gas, but the pickup is raised up. Now, I'm pretty sure that is the on pickup, that tube there, but there should be a reserve pickup down in the bottom that you can't even see because I think it's kind of been covered over with dirt and stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna try to drain this tank, and then I bought this Rust at Harbor Freight, which was buy one get one free because the cashier forgot to scan my second bottle. So I'm gonna fill up the gas tank. I'm also gonna pop this spare reserve tank off and fill this. It's actually not so bad in there. Tiny bit of surface rust. I'm gonna go ahead and fill that too and wait a couple days and see where we get. Alright, I thought I could give a little more background on this bike while you watch me taking it apart. A week ago, my girlfriend and I drove up to Rhode Island to pick it up from a seller I found on Facebook Marketplace. It is definitely a piece of junk in some ways, but that's kind of what I was looking for. I wanted a more involved project to get into while I still have the 450 to ride around for fun. It doesn't run. It's a compression issue, which we're going to look into next episode. I'm hoping it has spark. Alright, well, to get the gas tank off, you gotta get the exhaust pipe off because this final mount goes through both. And to get the exhaust off, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna need to take this frame bar off as well. And I'm hoping that most of the issues are purely aesthetic because that stuff doesn't really bother me. I want to take this thing on trails. I want to teach my girlfriend how to ride on it. I want to teach my friends how to ride on it. So I kind of expect it to continue to be dropped and trashed. The way I see it, there will always be an absolutely pristine 70s Honda motorcycle on Facebook Marketplace for you to buy for a couple $1,000s. But where's the fun in that? It's a lot more exciting to get something that's been pretty much neglected and bring it back into a respectable shape. So that's kind of my goal with this project, and I'm really looking forward to it. So it looks like the fuel line actually is routed down through the frame and out here, and obviously there are two spouts here, one's for on, one's for reserve. So I think I'm going to do is see if I can drain any more of this out via the fuel line. It looks like I can't. Alright, I think that's a good stopping point for now. I gotta run to work, but we got the frame bar off, the exhaust off, we got the tank and the seat off, and I just drained the tank. So I'm gonna let this air out overnight, and once it's completely dry, I'm gonna fill it with Rust and seal the bottom here, and see how clean we can get it. Alright, so I just threw on these stopper valves again that were on the bike, and now I'm gonna pour in some Rust. Alright, so while this sits with the Rust, I'm going to take like a sponge or a paper towel or something and try to clean off a lot of the dirt. Alright, so after I filled up the tank with the Evaporest, I started cleaning the frame a little bit just with a sponge, some Goo Gone, Dawn dish soap, that sort of thing. And now that it's a little cleaner, I think I'm going to start with the wiring. And this wiring is a mess. The really great thing is he actually bought one of these AGM batteries, a 6-volt one for this bike. And that's great because these are like 50 or 60 bucks. And they're much nicer than the lead acid batteries that you have to fill up with water and all that stuff. So I think to start, the obvious thing is to take a look at that diagram and try to just hook up the battery, turn the key, and see if we get any lights or anything. Now, I did already check, and this battery does have like 6.2 volts right now. So I don't know how long it's been sitting. I know he had the bike for about a year before he sold it to me. So maybe it just holds the charge well. I don't know. So we've got all kinds of weird stuff going on here with the wiring in this battery area. A lot of this stuff over here, these colored wires look stock, and I can already tell what some of these are just because I know they're using the same color as on the 450. So these are turn signals. I think this is a tail light. All right, so looking at this wiring diagram, here's the battery. Looks like the positive is red, and that red splits into a red and white and a red and bluish purple. And then negative is obviously just green for ground. So when I look over here, I can see that this is the red and white, this is the red and blue here, and this red and blue has been extended with this black lamp cord, and it's got like American flag tape on it. It's labeled as black 3. So I really have no idea what they were doing here. I don't know why they needed this extension, but I'm considering maybe just cutting it off. It looks like it is just a pretty bad solder job at the end. So I think what I might do is just clip that. And here you can see is the green. It's obviously the ground. So something I already know that I'm gonna have to buy are these little 3.5 millimeter bullet connectors, because these bikes use them and you can't just get them at a regular hardware store, at least not here in the States. So I'm definitely gonna invest in some of those, because while I'm not terribly strict about this wiring being fully exactly as it came out of the factory, I do think it would be nice to try to keep it as accessible as possible for the future owners, or just for me when I come back in for maintenance. Alright, this is a mess, but it's only because I don't have those bullet connectors yet. All that's really happening is I have my positive going up here into my red and white, and my red and blue, and my negative going into my green. So, let's come over here and let's turn the key on and see what we get. Looks like no neutral light. Let's try the headlight. Maybe high. Oh, there goes the high beam. Low beam. Oh, there you go. Alright, so if you go, there you go, there's low beam. There's high beam. You can see the faintest bit of an indicator. Let's try turn signals. Right. Nothing. I don't hear the relay clicking. Left. Nothing. No relay clicking either. Horn. That is a really quiet horn, but it works. Let me see. Oh, brake. I guess tail light. We turn the headlight on. Oh, there might be a hint of something there. It's hard to tell with the lens on. Let me pop the lens off. Alright, so this could be a bad bulb or a low battery, but you can kind of make out a little bit of some light there. And then if I go over here and I press the front brake, you can see that another one comes on. And if I press the rear brake, let me see. Looks like the rear brake switch works too. It looks like the wiring works for the tail light and the brake light. It's just that maybe the bulb is corroded somehow. Alright, so now that we know that the wiring for the headlight, tail light, and brake lights and horn all work, we definitely have to look at the turn signals, but I also wanted to check if we have spark, because this thing was not running when I got it. So, I'll turn the key on. Let's see if we get any spark. Okay, looks like no. Alright, so we didn't get any spark, so the first thing I'm going to check here are the points before I go looking and digging out the coil and everything like that. Alright, so I cleaned the points a little bit. I'm still not getting anything. Usually they even spark here when you separate and connect them, and I'm not getting anything there either. So I'm gonna go look at the coil and the condenser and everything and make sure it's all wired in. Well, that didn't take long. There's the red wire coming out of it. You can see that blue thing, that's the ignition coil up there. Here's the red wire coming out of it. And it's supposed to go right into that red wire, which right now is just going into here and to nothing. I actually tore out, it had been soldered together. I guess it had split at some point. So maybe I'll solder that back in, or maybe I won't bother and I'll just get a new connector. Regardless, I'm gonna hook those back up, red wire to red wire, and then let's see if we have spark. Oh, there you are. There's a spark. So we have spark. That's great. That means the coil and everything is working. Alright, so it looks like we have spark. And basically now I'm just going to need to find some of these 3.5mm bullet connectors so I can actually get this harness together with the proper connections, and instead of all this American flag duct tape wrapped around the wires. And after that I'm going to do some tidying up of the harness in areas like here where all the wires are just falling out. Alright, so I did a bunch of work after I turned the camera off last night getting this wiring harness clean and put back together. So the first thing I did is I took the coil out and I took these two leads and I actually just soldered them back with some matching heat shrink. So you can see here I soldered the green and red wires out of the ignition coil and I used matching heat shrink on those. Then my turn signal, these gray wires, were chewed up a little bit by mice and I didn't have any gray heat shrink, so I just used black. But you can still tell they're the gray turn signal wires. Then I came over to the turn signal relay and fixed those connections up. So I just used some of the bullet connectors from all that extra wiring that I got with the bike, and I soldered them on and then heat shrinked it. And I did the same thing here for the battery terminals. This already had one. This one, just using some red heat shrink because it's positive, and one of those wire terminals and the same green heat shrink for the negative. And then I just made a little pin out of some steel stock I had, and the pin just goes in that hinge there. So I just hooked up the battery and all this wiring goes in there. The battery fits in nicely because it's actually smaller than the original. And then I'm also missing this bolt, but this would get a bolt in there and then the cover would go on top. And so you can see with all this wiring, we still have horn and neutral light I found last night. The bike just wasn't in neutral. And high beam indicator, headlight, and the tail light bulb is still just barely glowing. That's just a voltage issue. I'm sure when the bike is running, that won't be an issue. Alright, let's pop this headlight bucket open and see how it looks. I do not have high expectations. Okay. Well, could be worse, but there is more electrical tape than I would have liked. Alright, so last night I popped the headlight bucket open and I looked at all the wiring. A few of the wires were frayed, or, as is the case for a lot of the wiring in this bike, broken in half, twisted together, and wrapped in electrical tape. So I replaced those connections with solder, and I determined that actually the only reason the turn signals weren't working is because my battery didn't really have enough juice to get that relay to click on. And I think my handlebar switch was a little corroded. So I just clicked the switch back and forth a bunch of times, and I started getting my indicator light because I just skipped the relay and connected through it with an alligator clip. The turn signals and the turn signal indicator do work. I just don't really like how they're mounted, but I think I'm gonna make a separate video with the turn signals and build like a special bracket to make them actually look a little nicer. But basically, because all the wiring is good and I got all the unnecessary electrical tape out of there, I'm just gonna throw this headlight back in, and the wiring on this bike should basically be done and just needs some prettying up. So here's a reason to stay within the same bike manufacturer for all your projects. I didn't have this bolt, nut, and spring to adjust the headlight position, and because I ended up doing that halogen upgrade on the 450, I actually don't need this on that bike, so I just took it off and I threw it in here, and it works. So let's get this headlight in there. So I just went over the whole wiring harness, wiping it down with some brake clean to get any of that residue oil or grime off of it, because now I'm gonna wrap it with this Tisa fabric harness tape. This is supposedly just like a one and done thing. You don't have to use any loom or heat shrink or anything like that. It's just a tape that you can wrap your wire in, and it's resistant to like gasoline and water and oil and anything that might ruin your regular electrical tape. So I'm going to start at the bottom here, and I'm going to wrap this whole main harness. Alright, so it's a little tight up here by the headlight, so I just took the bucket off. Alright, so the goal of this first video and this first week of work was just to go through and clean up the bike, sort of see what we're working with, and to go through the wiring. And like you just saw, I just finished bundling up the wiring harness, and all that wiring works. I have taken off the turn signals, but I did check to make sure those worked before I took them off, because in a future video I'm going to be switching out how they're mounted to the bike. But anyway, the last thing I want to check here before we finish this video is how this evaporust did in the tank. So it's been about a week actually of sitting in here, and this tank was pretty rough before, so let's see what this looks like. So it does look a lot better than it did. The rust in there is kind of black instead of like reddish brown. So I'm curious if it's loosened up enough that if I sprayed the hose in there and emptied it out a couple times, I might be able to get it even cleaner. Alright, so you can see that the water did make a difference, but actually the biggest issue is this big glob at the bottom there. And I was just picking at it with like this metal skewer, and I think it's actually like varnished, like gummy fuel. So what I'm going to use now is some carb cleaner. Just spray everywhere where there's this black stuff, and see where that gets us. Alright, so for the past week I've been working on some other projects, and I just had some carb cleaner sitting down in here to try to loosen up. I determined a lot of that stuff, that gunk on the bottom, was probably like hardened gasoline. So you can see it actually is looking a lot better because that carb cleaner kind of softened it up, and then I just stuck this little like welding rod down there and scraped a bunch of it up. There is still a fair amount left though, and there is definitely still some surface rust that I think was probably covered up by the gas, and so it wasn't really able to dissolve. Yeah, there's still a lot of nasty stuff in there. It does look a lot better, but so next what I'm going to try is I'm just going to put a bunch of like screws and bolts and hardware in there, and probably some carb cleaner too, and shake it around for a while and see if I can break up the rest of that sort of solidified, gunked up gasoline. Alright, so those screws help to get a lot of that gasoline gunk out of there, but I think the built-up gas was actually protecting some rust from the evaporust, so I'm going to do another couple days with the evaporust now, and luckily this stuff is reusable, so I'm just going to pour it back into the tank. Alright, so like you just saw, we drained the evaporust out of the tank, and I actually just went up, it's dark so I didn't film, but I went up and rinsed out the tank with water and drained it, so it looks really good in there. The little bit of residue left is really stuck to the side of the tank, and it's all kind of in that very bottom spot where there was all that gunk buildup. And I've tried to scrape it up, but it's really not going to budge, and so I don't think it's going to get up into the fuel and into the carburetor. Obviously, the risk here with having a rusty tank, outside of it rusting and getting like pinholes, is just rust and other debris getting into the carb jets and clogging up the carb. So I think we've done a lot to prevent that. So I've just rinsed it with water. I don't want to get any kind of like flash rust or surface rust because it's still wet. So I'm gonna pour some of this denatured alcohol in there and swirl it around. And then after that, because I'm not going to be filling the tank with gas for quite some time, I'm going to go ahead and take this WD-40 and the air compressor and do kind of like a mist. I read someone talking about this on a forum. Try to kind of mist the inside with WD-40 and then seal it, and you know, that'll be pretty good to prevent rust. So I'm going to start with this alcohol. Just do a little bit of this. The idea is that it'll kind of absorb the water and then evaporate out. And obviously it's going to be draining out of the bottom, out of the reserve probably. So I'm really happy with how the inside of the tank turned out. The last thing I want to try is see if I can get this dent out of the side. Alright, using that tool helped me realize that this dent doesn't really bother me anyways. think I'm going to leave the episode there. We got the gas tank clean, we got the wiring checked out, and I think we're off to a really good start on this bike. So thanks for watching.